My name is Colleen Martin, and I am here today to talk through why do I love campaigning even though the work is so exhausting. So I want to, before I jump right in, give you a little bit of background of who I am and how I even got into politics. So I do not come from a political family whatsoever. I was born and raised in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. So our big claim to fame these days is the Chicago Cubs winning the 2016 World Series. I have never been more excited to say that I am from Chicago and that I am a Cubs fan, because after 108 years of not winning, it is very fun to be a winner. So that is basically the extent of my Chicago blood. When I say I'm from the Chicagoland area, I did grow up a full 25 miles outside of the city center, and so I think a lot of my upbringing really helped shape the way that I view ideas and the way that I view people, and as a part, the way I view politics. So I'm the oldest of 4 children, but nobody in my immediate family or my extended family, maybe 2 or 3, identify with the same political party as I do. So it's a heated debate every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, me versus maybe my 20 cousins, aunts, and uncles, but it is a lot of fun, and it challenges me to take ownership of what I think and why I think that. And I would say that it first began when I was in college. I went to Baylor University in Waco, Texas. And when I went to college, I had no intention of majoring in political science. It's not that I wasn't interested in it, it just wasn't on my radar. So when I was a sophomore, everyone at the university is required to take a course in American constitutional development. So I sat in second row in that course, and I fell in love with the material. I think it helped that our professors were married to one another. They taught the class jointly, so they created the most engaging and meaningful course for me. We studied everything from the separation of powers to monumental Supreme Court cases, all the way to voting rights. And it was the voting rights stuff that really, really stuck with me. I fell in love with the material. I fell in love with the content. And it was then that I decided, okay, this is something that I want to pursue, not only with my major, but also as a career. So we can fast forward all the way through college to graduation day when I was looking for my first job. Up to that point, I had only taken internships, obviously. I wasn't really qualified to do much other than help file papers, help schedule, all kinds of little stuff. So I had very normal work hours as an intern. I went in for 3 days, worked from 8 to 5, closed the books, got to go home at the end of the day. So when I applied to work on my first political campaign after graduation, I was in for a world of shock for what it actually entailed. The hours were way longer than I anticipated. The work was much harder than I had ever anticipated. And I never planned to go into fundraising. I had a political science major. I thought I was going to change the world with policy and ideas and all this different stuff, when that's not really the reality of how it happens. So the first job that I accepted was this campaign for an individual who lived in Illinois. And we worked our butts off. I was hired to do something called call time manager. So I assume all of you are not campaign savvy with all the lingo and the title, so I'm going to do my best job to break it down for you. So I was in the fundraising department. And fundraising is kind of like the engine of the campaign. We're not really seen, we're not really heard a lot of the time, but what we do is make sure that our candidate has enough money to get the message out. So whether that's through the mailers you get in your inboxes or your snail mail mailboxes, or whether that's the ads that you see on TV, or just basic field programs. So when people knock doors on your house or talk to you about what candidate you support, why you support them, that's all funded through fundraising. And a majority of the money, and the most effective way to raise money, is through what we call call time, where it is your call time manager, which was myself, and your candidate sitting in a room with binders of information, people, their phone number, their address, how much they've given to different candidates in the past, which sounds creepy, but it's all public information. It's all available on the Federal Election Commission, the FEC's website. So if any of you have ever donated to a candidate and you have given $200 or more in one election cycle, your information is publicly available. So it was my job to research those folks and to figure out who was best for our candidate to call and ask for money. So most days I would go into the office, 8 a.m., ready to work hard. Candidate would come in, 9 a.m. We would sit down and dial together for 7 hours. It was exhausting. He would then go home. I would have an hour to do all of my data entry and then prep for the next day's calls. So I left the office most days probably around 8 p.m., and if it was earlier, I brought the work home with me to prep for the next day. So looking at that perspective compared to the intern jobs, I really had no idea what I was getting involved in. But I loved that work. I loved the campaign. I loved the idea that I was helping propel a candidate and a cause that I was passionate about. So fast forward to November of 2012, and we won. It was so fun. And everything that we had been working towards was realized. So if you would have asked me in 2012, your work is exhausting, why do you love campaigning? I would have been able to say, well, because we got somebody elected to Congress, it's awesome. The values and the ideas that we have been fighting for are all now realized. I thought I was making a difference through my work, through getting somebody elected. That was how I viewed that question at first. So fast forward to another congressional race that I did, where we weren't as lucky. And in this role, instead of the call time manager, I was actually the finance director. So I was in charge of employees who did all of the work, and it was my strategy that was getting us to raise this million plus $2 million number that we thought we would need to be effective. So while we did raise all of that money, I had never put more time and effort into a program. It was the first time I had ever done something like that. So I would spend hours at my computer figuring out, shoot, this event underperformed. How are we going to make that up through online money? Or how are we going to make that up through direct mail when we send solicitations to individuals' mailboxes and ask for contributions that way? And how can I bolster this call time number? So all of that came together. Election day rolls around, and we lost. So I was faced with this same question. Why am I campaigning? And I'm exhausted more so than ever before because I've had more ownership in this program than I ever had before. And I did not have an answer. If someone asked me, why do you like doing this? Why are you so excited? Why are you committed to this work? It was only the exhaustion that was speaking through after that race. So that made me think, okay, maybe I need to approach this question differently. Maybe I need to start looking from a different lens if this is the work that I want to continue to do. Your first loss does that. It's really sobering. You have all these ideals and these things that you're fighting for, and when they don't happen, it makes the 12-plus hour days seem very minuscule in the grand scheme of things. It makes the work feel very belittled almost. Like I poured my heart, soul, and energy into this candidate or cause, and what we wanted to happen didn't happen. So how could I reconcile the idea that my work was still valuable when I wasn't getting the outcome that I wanted? So then I looked at the question a different way. I thought, well, what if the value of the work that I'm doing isn't determined by my outcome? And I think that if I had this mindset back in 2012 and then so on and so forth when I won different races or lost different races, the value of what I was doing wouldn't necessarily be determined by something that I, at the end of the day, don't have control of. The electorate has control. The people have control. I can raise as much money as humanly possible. I can help the campaign put forth the best message as humanly possible. But if it's not resonating with everybody, that's an outcome I can't necessarily control. So I started to look into the idea of value. What is valuable? How do we define value? And I came across this book by a gentleman named Dr. Martin Seligman. He's a psychologist. He really focuses a lot on positive psychology. And the way that he was able to articulate a lot of what I was feeling, it just was like a light bulb went on. I knew then that I was letting my value and the value of the work that we were doing be determined by a favorable outcome. And that is when the question, why am I campaigning, even though I'm so exhausted, was sort of flipped on its head for me. It wasn't necessarily, why am I doing this? as much as it was, regardless of the outcome, I am propelled to do this. So there's, value. We can talk about value. It's pretty vague. Everybody has different ideas of what is valuable to them or what isn't. But it was this book, Flourish, by Dr. Seligman, that helped put it in perspective for me. So he talks about two things. He talks about achievement and he talks about meaning. And through those two items, achievement and meaning, I really be able to see through his words what I had been feeling. So when it comes to achievement, he talks about becoming excellent at something. So for me, I knew I had personal achievement. I was an excellent fundraiser. Over the course of from 2011 to 2016, collectively, I've raised more than $15 million for candidates and causes. I know I'm good at what I do. I can outraise any goal that's set before me. I have good strategy. I know I'm competent. That's personal achievement. That work is valuable. And then meaning. Is what I am doing making the world a better place or making my community a better place? And this is the part that got me stuck on the outcome, because I'm thinking, well, no, if my work doesn't get done, if what I'm hoping to accomplish isn't realized, then no, the meaning is useless. And then I think that's when my brain put this whole puzzle piece together, that the value of my work helps to determine the meaning. So my ideals and the things that I'm committed to and the things that I want to fight for as a person give my work meaning, even if they aren't realized through an election. So all that to say, in any work that you guys do, whether my fiance is a teacher, and so he and I have had a couple conversations along these lines where it's a little bit universally applicable. He can prepare for as much content to set up students to succeed, but he can't control whether or not they do the work. He can't control whether they turn in their homework, study for their papers. So inevitably, he might have a few students every year or semester that don't make a passing grade. That's not the outcome he was shooting for. You don't want your students to fail. But at the end of the day, you can't let somebody else, in the way they impact your work, determine your outcome. And so for me, in political campaigns, it's the same situation. I can't let what the electorate decides determine the value of my work. I have to give it meaning on my own, because I believe what I am doing by fighting for the ideas that I believe in and helping that be realized in candidates that I want to support brings purpose, value, and it helps beat the outcome. So I guess my last point for you all to consider today is, how do you find your work valuable? What do you determine as valuable? And if the outcome that you want isn't realized, how do you make sure that the measure of your success isn't determined by that, but it's determined by what you have achieved and the meaning that you are bringing to your community? So thanks.